Welcome to our new series, Sunraysia, Keeping the Show on the Road. And joining me today is Donata Carrazza, Artistic Director of the Mildura Writers Festival. Donata, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, John. Lovely to be here.
Well, the Writers Festival is coming up next weekend, and of course it promises to be a fabulous event. It was, however, impacted by COVID last year, like so many events. It went ahead in an online format. Tell us how you're coping with it this year.
Okay, well, yes, last year was quite extraordinary for so many people, but this year, rather than simply going online only, we've decided to to put on a hybrid festival, which will allow us to have people here, and it will allow for people to have a look at the festival online. And in a way that does expand our audience, but what it also does is complicate things. So it's required us to think very carefully about how we produce this festival, and we didn't want to compromise on any of the events, but we have in some ways made it a smaller event. So we normally would have run from a Thursday to a Sunday with probably about a dozen guests, guest authors. This time that number's been reduced, and reduced even further because we unfortunately one of our guests has had to cancel her appearance. However, she will be able to be with us online, and we're fortunate to have local service providers who have been able to work with this new approach to producing events.
Yes.
And live streaming. We're fortunate to, last year we worked with Simon Jackson, and Simon's back again this year.
Yes.
Doing his Mildura live stream. He's basically created a new business in a way to deal with this need within events and festivals, and we're grateful.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little brief history of the Writers Festival and your involvement, and you're the artistic
Sure.
director
Well,
this year.
we're into our 26th year, and 27 years ago, when I had moved back to Mildura with my then husband Stefano De Pieri, Stefano and I were working in the Grand Hotel with my family, and we were running Stefano's restaurant in the cellars of the hotel, which is still there and going strong. And at the time we'd known about the history of the wonderful sculpture triennial that had existed in Mildura, and of course there were events on at the Arts Centre, but we were looking for things to do and wondering what was possible. So we thought, well, let's see if we can create things ourselves. But it happened really organically. Stefano had a very good friend in a man called Philip Hodgins, an Australian poet. They had been mates. They'd been up to mischief in all sorts of ways in Melbourne. They lived together. They of course had kept contact. And Philip, when I met him, had terminal cancer. He had leukemia, but he had outlived the prognosis at the time, and he was already into several years beyond the time they expected him to live in. He had a family, he had a daughter, and he was really enthusiastic when Steph called him up and said, "Look, why don't you come up and do a poetry reading?" And he said, "Absolutely, I can." And he said, "I'll bring with me Robert Gray." Just happens to be one of the most brilliant poets in the country, and Robert was based in Sydney. So their idea was to come to Mildura, put on their readings, but also do some limericks of John Shaw Neilson. At the time we thought, this is wonderful. We will put on a meal, a glass of wine, and it'll be fantastic. If we get a dozen people, maybe even more, how fantastic. And it was going to be in the cellars in the restaurant. It happened to sell out very quickly, and in fact it went beyond the numbers that we could contain in any one space in the restaurant. 80 people booked for that event, and it was very funny. $12.50 for a bowl of pasta and a glass of wine, and that's how we did things back then. And so we fed everybody in the restaurant, and then we proceeded up to another space in the Grand Hotel, and it was in fact the ballroom, and we were able to put on the readings there. And they were loved by the people who attended, and there was enthusiasm, and of course Philip was enthusiastic, and he agreed to work with us on another event the following year, and that's how the first festival actually began, with Philip seeking out his network, and not just any network, the peak of literary figures in Australia. And we had a festival then in '95 with Les Murray, Helen Garner, Peter Goldsworthy. Philip came back, and others, and it began from there.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And it's been going ever since.
Humble beginnings, a simple idea that's really blossomed into a fantastic festival, and of course it's going to be held at the Mildura Club this year.
Yes.
And it's got a great future, I think. You see that ahead as being continuing to be strong.
Well, I'd like to think it has a great future. We're, as an organisation, we're lucky. We're aligned with Arts Mildura. We're under the umbrella of Arts Mildura. They have a really promising future, that organisation does. We are aligned in a very strong way with them, and our little festival has a really wonderful voluntary committee that many of those on that committee have been working. People like Helen Healy, Judy Harris, Hilary Healy, and so many others have been working on that committee in a voluntary capacity for years. And at festival time, they all put in a huge effort, and that's why it's so loved by people who come back.
Yeah, no, that's just brilliant. And of course, the festival doesn't just attract local people; it attracts people from all around Australia. And just remind us of who's on as part of it this year.
That's right, John. We are besides our writers, who include Wesley Enoch, who's also a theatre director. Judith Nangala Crispin, who is a poet but also a visual artist and a musicologist. We've got the author of a Booker shortlisted work called The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree, and her name's Shokofa Azar. She's an Iranian journalist.
Wow.
Who got political asylum here in Australia. So her session will be fascinating.
Yeah.
We also have a food writer, Alice Zaslavsky, who is going to be
good on these names.
Who's going to be here for the feature dinner on the Saturday night, and that's a dinner devoted to the garlic bulb, and that's likely to be a lot of fun.
And is that at the club? Dinner?
No, the dinner is actually in the old Priceline store.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the great thing about the festival is that it attracts our local audience, but also visitors from out of town. And what they love is that they get to go to a whole lot of venues. So this year we'll be having events mostly at the Mildura Club, but also at the Rowers Club, at the old Priceline store in the mall, at Vanden Estate, and at the Bistro in the Grand Hotel. So we're able to use a lot of different places, and that allows people to walk. A lot of them stay in town and they walk around and get to enjoy the local landscape.
Brilliant. Well, that'll be fantastic. Just on another note, and in closing, of course, Donata, you took over the running of the Collins Booksellers store in Langtree Avenue on the Langtree Mall last year in the midst of COVID, really. How's that been going? And I mean, you're down there with some of the traders who have been having difficult times.
Yes. Look, I think that the mall has a future. I think regional centres have a future. And just talking about that space itself, it's an interesting space. To have taken it on during COVID is also interesting, but my faith in this time for us is that people will be curious about regional centres and they'll want to travel there, and I think that gives us an opportunity to be in business and to look after people who are coming through. But equally, I think the mall as a space is really very well looked after by the City Heart Management. They do a great job. Just now over the school holidays, we've had the ice skating rink, and it's brought so many people into town, into that space, and just the foot traffic is wonderful, and I think that can be maintained, and there are lots of opportunities in the mall. I think we just have to think imaginatively, really.
Excellent. Well, look, all the best for everything with the
you.
Writers Festival and your own business, and thank you for coming in, and we look forward to catching up with you again sometime.
Thank you very much, Don.
And be sure to get all of your news at the milduraweekly.com.au website, and of course the paper is free in your letterbox every Friday.